The gymnasium air was thick and sweet, a heavy blanket woven from the smells of spilled soda, popcorn, and the faint, dusty perfume of old varnish on the basketball court floor. Sunlight, cut into long, hazy rectangles by the high, dirty windows, illuminated floating dust motes that danced like tiny, silent constellations. The ambient noise was a chaotic symphony. The squeak and scuff of 100 pairs of sneakers on wood, the layered chatter of children high on sugar, the deeper, more reserved murmur of their parents. It all blended into a single, rolling wave of sound that washed over Evelyn Reed without leaving a trace. She stood near the edge of the crowd, a still point in the turning world of the elementary school's annual career day fair. Her posture was straight but not rigid, a natural alignment that spoke of discipline so deeply ingrained it had become instinct. She wore simple gray trousers, functional and clean, and a plain black long-sleeved shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, severe knot at the nape of her neck. There was nothing about her that demanded a second glance. She was a ghost in the machine of the everyday. Her daughter, Maya, was the complete opposite. Maya was a sunburst of energy, her bright pink t-shirt a beacon in the throng. At 10 years old, she vibrated with an excitement that seemed too large for her small frame. She darted from table to table, her eyes wide, collecting pamphlets from firefighters and veterinarians, her small bag growing heavy with cheap pens and candy. Evelyn watched her, her gaze soft but her attention total. Her eyes did not just follow her daughter. They tracked her, cataloging the space around her, noting the exits, the positions of other adults, the flow of movement through the crowded room. It was not a conscious effort. It was like breathing. She registered the slightly too loud group of young men near the recruitment tables long before they became a problem. There were 3 of them, all in their early 20s, clad in crisp Army combat uniforms. Their boots were polished to a mirror shine, their haircuts aggressively fresh. They carried themselves with the particular brand of swagger unique to young men given a uniform and a sliver of authority. They were not recruiters, they looked more like local National Guard members, tasked with the low-stakes duty of handing out brochures and looking impressive. They laughed loudly, their shoulders back, chests puffed out. One of them, whose name tape read Davis, was clearly the leader. He did most of the talking, his voice carrying over the din. His 2 companions, Miller and Sanchez, orbited him, their laughter a half-beat behind his, their eyes constantly checking his for approval. Evelyn catalogued them and dismissed them. Low-level variables. Background noise. Her focus returned to Maya, who was now in an animated conversation with 2 of her friends near the bleachers. Maya's hands were flying as she spoke, her face alight with earnest pride. Evelyn was too far away to hear the words, but she knew the topic. She had told Maya she could talk about it, but to be general. Vague. People did not understand. The sound that cut through the gym's noise was Davis's laugh. It was not a pleasant sound. It was sharp and dismissive, designed to draw attention. "Did you hear that?" he said to Miller, his voice pitched to Carrie. "This little girl just said her mom was a Navy SEAL." Miller snorted. "A girl SEAL? That's a good one. What, did she sell the cookies?" Their laughter was cruel. Maya's friends shuffled their feet, suddenly uncomfortable. Maya's face, so bright a moment ago, crumpled. Her shoulders slumped. The light in her eyes went out. The group of soldiers, led by Davis, sauntered over. They moved with a predatory looseness, enjoying the small stage they had created. "Hey, kid," Davis said, leaning down, putting his hands on his knees to mockingly lower himself to her level. "You shouldn't lie. It's not nice. There are no girl SEALs. It's a man's job. You understand." Maya's lower lip trembled. She looked at the floor, her small hands twisting the strap of her bag. She did not answer. "What's the matter?" Sanchez chimed in, smirking. "Cat got your tongue. Or did your SEAL mom teach you to be sneaky?" That was the moment Evelyn began to move. She did not rush. Her steps were measured, deliberate, silent. She flowed through the gaps in the crowd, a river of purpose in a sea of distraction. No one seemed to notice her approach until she was there. She placed herself between the soldiers and her daughter, a simple, physical statement. She did not touch Maya, but her proximity was a shield. "That's enough," she said. Her voice was quiet. Not a whisper, but low and without inflection. It held no anger, no fear, no challenge. It was a statement of fact. A period at the end of a sentence. Davis straightened up, turning his attention to Evelyn. He looked her up and down, a slow, insolent appraisal. He saw a woman in her 40s, plain, unremarkable. He saw no threat. He saw weakness. "Who's this?" he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "The SEAL mom herself." "Ma'am, you need to teach your kid not to make up stories. It's called stolen valor. It's a big deal." "We're leaving," Evelyn said, her eyes on Davis, but her awareness on all three of them. She noted Miller's position to Davis's right, slightly back. Sanchez was to the left, his weight on his back foot, lazy. They were sloppy. She gave them an exit. A wide, clear path to de-escalate. All they had to do was let her and her daughter walk away. It would have been that simple. Davis mistook her calm for fear. He saw her lack of aggression as an invitation to press his advantage. He took a half-step closer, invading her personal space. The smell of cheap cologne and arrogance filled the air. "Or what?" he challenged, his voice dropping into a mock-threatening tone. "What are you going to do about it, ma'am? You gonna write a strongly worded letter to my commanding officer?" Miller and Sanchez laughed on cue. A few nearby parents were starting to watch, their brows furrowed with concern. Evelyn did not move. She did not blink. Her stillness was absolute. "Leave. Now," she said. The words were identical to her first statement, but the space between them was different. Colder. Heavier. This final, calm warning was the last thing Davis heard as a man who believed he was in control of the situation. He saw it as the last gasp of a cornered, helpless woman. He decided to make an example of her. He scoffed, a theatrical sound of contempt. "You know what? I think you're the one who needs to leave." He reached out and shoved her shoulder. It was not a hard shove. It was a push of dismissal. An act of casual dominance. It was meant to make her stumble, to humiliate her, to prove his point to the small, watching crowd. Evelyn did not stumble. Her body absorbed the force of the push with no discernible effect, as if he had pushed against a concrete pillar. Her feet did not move. Her posture did not change. The only thing that moved was her head, a fractional turn as her eyes tracked his hand, then returned to his face. The gymnasium seemed to fall silent in that instant. The laughter of the other soldiers died in their throats. Davis's hand was still outstretched, his fingers slightly curled from the push. He looked at his hand, then at her, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He had expected a reaction. A cry, a step back, fear. He got nothing. "I said," he started, his voice a little louder now, a little less certain, "that you need to." He never finished the sentence. His frustration and confusion coalesced into a single, foolish decision. He decided to escalate. He turned his attention back to the source of his irritation, the child who had told the impossible story. "You see, kid," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness as he turned toward Maya. "Your mom's a liar and she's..." His hand moved toward Maya's arm. It was the crossing of a line drawn in invisible, indelible ink. It was the trigger. The shift in Evelyn was microscopic, yet total. It was not a decision. It was a reaction, a function of her central nervous system honed by 1,000 hours of brutal, unforgiving training. Her breathing, which had been slow and diaphragmatic, hitched for a single, imperceptible nanosecond before settling into a new rhythm. A shallow, efficient, oxygenating pattern designed for explosive action. Her weight, previously balanced evenly, shifted by millimeters to the balls of her feet. Her knees, already slightly bent, unlocked by another infinitesimal degree. Her shoulders, which had been relaxed, rolled forward almost invisibly, aligning the skeletal structure of her arms for maximum efficiency. Her eyes, which had been focused on Davis's face, lost all softness. The pupils seemed to dilate slightly, her gaze becoming a targeting system. It dropped from his eyes to his center of mass, then to the immediate threat, the hand moving toward her daughter. The change was so subtle that no one in the gymnasium could have possibly registered it. Except, perhaps, in the primal, animal part of their brain that screams when a predator stops pretending to be prey. Time itself seemed to warp. The world did not slow down for Evelyn. She simply processed it faster. Davis's hand, reaching for Maya, seemed to crawl through the air. She could see the fine hairs on his knuckles, the tension in his tendons, the slight sheen of sweat on his skin. His fingers were inches from Maya's sleeve. Evelyn's left hand moved. It was not a punch. It was not a slap. It was a precise, clinical application of anatomical knowledge. Her hand flowed forward, a blur of motion that seemed to leave after images in the hazy gym light. Her thumb and index finger found the exact point on the side of Davis's wrist where the radial nerve runs closest to the skin. She did not grab or squeeze. She simply pressed. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. A white-hot bolt of lightning shot up Davis's arm, from his wrist to his shoulder, overloading his nervous system. His brain sent a single, frantic command, "Let go." His fingers, which had been about to close on Maya's arm, spasmed open. A choked grunt of pain and shock escaped his lips. His entire arm recoiled as if he had touched a live wire. Evelyn did not give him time to recover. She used his own reflexive motion against him. As his body pulled back, she stepped in, closing the distance. Her right hand was already in position. It was open, her fingers held together, her hand slightly cupped. It was not a fist. A fist was for breaking things. This was for controlling things. She drove her palm heel upward and inward, striking him directly in the solar plexus. It was not a blow of immense power. It was a perfectly placed strike, delivered with the full kinetic force of her body weight moving forward. The impact was dull, a sound like a heavy book falling flat on a carpet. All the air in Davis's lungs evacuated in a single, silent rush. His diaphragm seized. His vision tunneled. The world turned into a kaleidoscope of bright, meaningless colors. His knees gave out, and he folded in on himself, collapsing to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. He landed on his side, his mouth open in a perfect O, trying to remember how to breathe. The entire sequence, from the nerve press to the collapse, took less than 1.5 seconds. Miller, to the right, had just started to process that something was wrong. He saw his leader go down and his training, however minimal, kicked in. He yelled, a half-formed word of surprise and anger, and lunged forward. He was clumsy. He led with his shoulder, his hands reaching out to grab. Evelyn had already pivoted. She did not even fully look at him. She saw his leading leg, his forward momentum, his committed center of gravity. As he entered her space, she simply moved her right foot in a short, precise arc. Her heel connected with the back of his advancing ankle. It was not a kick. It was a sweep. A redirection of his own energy. Physics did the rest. Miller's forward momentum carried his upper body onward, but his foundation was gone. He was instantly airborne, his arms flailing uselessly. He hit the polished wooden floor with a sickeningly loud crack, his head bouncing off the varnish. He lay there, dazed and groaning, the wind knocked out of him from the impact. 2 seconds. 2 men down. Sanchez, the last man standing, had frozen completely. He had taken a half-step forward when Miller moved, but now he was locked in place, a statue of disbelief. His brain was struggling to reconcile what his eyes had just seen. This plain, middle-aged woman had dismantled his 2 friends, 2 fit, young soldiers, with an efficiency that was both terrifying and incomprehensible. She had not even broken a sweat. Her expression had not changed. Evelyn turned her head slowly to face him. Her gaze was flat. Emotionless. It was the look of a scientist observing a specimen. It did not threaten. It simply saw him. It saw his wide eyes, his trembling hands, the way his weight was shifted back, ready to flee. She said nothing. She did not need to. Sanchez took one stumbling step backward. Then another. He raised his hands, palms forward, a universal gesture of surrender. "I'm good," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We're good." He continued to back away, his eyes never leaving her, until he bumped into one of the vendor tables, rattling the pamphlets and displays. The frozen moment broke. The background noise of the gymnasium did not return gradually. It was as if it had never been there at all. The silence that followed was absolute, profound. It was a heavy, weighted thing, pressing down on everyone. 200 people, parents and children, were staring. Mouths were agape. A teacher holding a stack of papers had let half of them flutter to the floor, forgotten. A child's half-eaten hot dog lay on the ground, dropped in the moment of shock. On the floor lay Corporal Davis, curled in a fetal position, making small, desperate gasping sounds. A few feet away, Private Miller was pushing himself up onto his elbows, his face a mask of pain and confusion. And standing over them, a silent sentinel, was Evelyn Reed. She did not look at the men on the floor. She did not look at the stunned crowd. Her first and only move was to turn back to her daughter. She knelt down, bringing herself level with Maya. Her movements were fluid, graceful. The transition from warrior to mother was seamless. She placed her hands gently on Maya's shoulders. "Are you okay?" she asked. Her voice was the same quiet, steady tone she had used before. The storm had passed, and she was the calm at its center. Maya, who had watched the entire event with wide, terrified eyes, simply nodded. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. Evelyn gently wiped it away with her thumb. "It's okay now," she said softly. "It's over." From the bleachers, a man began to move. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a face that was a roadmap of sun and time. He wore a simple pair of jeans, a polo shirt, and a faded blue cap that read, U.S. Navy Chief, R.E.T. He moved with a purpose that cut through the crowd's paralysis, his eyes fixed on the scene. He was not a large man, but he carried an air of authority that was unmistakable. He stopped a few feet away, not addressing Evelyn directly, but looking at the two soldiers on the floor. He glanced at Davis, still struggling for breath, and at Miller, now sitting up and holding his head. He looked at the precise, economical way they had been dispatched. He looked at Evelyn, now comforting her child, her posture relaxed but still perfectly aligned. He saw what no one else in the room could see. He saw the training. He saw the discipline. He saw the ghost of a world far removed from this gymnasium. He turned to the man sitting next to where he had been, another parent who was staring in slack-jawed wonder. "You see that," the old sailor said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, but clear in the unnatural silence. "That wasn't a fight. That was a system." He pointed a thumb at Evelyn. "That palm heel strike to the diaphragm. The nerve point control on the wrist. Textbook. That's close quarters combat. That's spec war doctrine." He shook his head slowly, a look of profound, professional respect on his face. "That woman. She's not just some mom. She's the genuine article." The spell was finally broken by the hurried footsteps of the school principal, a harried-looking man named Mr. Henderson, followed by a campus security guard whose primary qualification was owning a uniform. "What in the world happened here?" Henderson demanded, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. The two soldiers on the floor, the terrified third one, the silent woman and child, and the sea of stunned faces. "These men assaulted her," a voice called out from the crowd. It was a father who had been standing nearby. "They were harassing the little girl," a teacher added, pointing a trembling finger at Davis. "They pushed the mother." A chorus of agreement rose from the onlookers. The narrative was clear, unanimous. The soldiers were the aggressors. Evelyn had acted in defense. The local police arrived minutes later, two officers who moved with a weary professionalism. They separated the parties, their expressions carefully neutral as they listened to the principal's frantic summary. One officer began taking statements from the witnesses, his pen scratching methodically on his notepad. The other approached Evelyn. "Ma'am, can I get your side of the story?" he asked, his tone respectful. "They verbally harassed my daughter," Evelyn stated, her voice still level. "They refused to leave when asked. One of them put his hands on me, and then attempted to grab my child." She delivered the facts without embellishment. "I neutralized the threat." The officer blinked at the phrase, neutralized the threat. It was not the language he was used to hearing from civilians. "Okay. Can I see some identification, ma'am?" Evelyn retrieved her wallet and handed him her driver's license. He looked at it. Evelyn Reed, an address in a quiet suburban neighborhood. She was just a person. It did not compute with the scene in front of him. Meanwhile, because the assailants were in uniform, military protocol had been engaged. A call was made. 20 minutes later, a vehicle screeched to a halt outside the gymnasium. A first sergeant of the Army National Guard strode into the building, his face a thundercloud. He was a big man, his uniform straining at the shoulders, his jaw set like granite. His eyes immediately found his 3 soldiers. 2 were now sitting sullenly on the floor, being watched by a police officer. The third, Sanchez, was leaning against a wall, looking pale. Davis. Miller. What the hell is this? The first sergeant boomed, his voice echoing in the now quiet gym. His immediate instinct was to defend his men. He saw a civilian woman and assumed his soldiers had been victims of a misunderstanding or, worse, an attack. He marched over to the police officer. First Sergeant Clark. These are my men. What are the charges? Right now, it's looking like assault and menacing, Sergeant, the officer replied calmly. We have about 30 witnesses who all say your men initiated the confrontation with a 10-year-old girl and her mother. First Sergeant Clark's expression hardened with skepticism. 30 witnesses. Or 30 friends of this woman. It was then that the old sailor, the retired Command Master Chief, stepped forward. He moved with a quiet dignity that commanded attention. First Sergeant, he said, his voice low but firm. Clark turned, his eyes narrowing. He saw the faded cap, the weathered face, the unmistakable bearing of a senior enlisted leader. His own posture shifted slightly, becoming more formal. Master Chief, he acknowledged, reading the rank insignia implied by the cap and the man's demeanor. Your boys picked the wrong fight, the Master Chief said simply. They got arrogant, they crossed a line, and they learned a lesson in humility from a professional. A professional? Clark asked, glancing dismissively at Evelyn, who was now speaking quietly with her daughter. First Sergeant, the Master Chief continued, his voice dropping even lower, I spent 30 years in the Navy. 25 of that in special warfare. I know what I'm looking at. You have 2 men on the ground who were put there with 0 wasted motion. You need to stop looking at her like a civilian and start asking the right questions. He nodded toward the officer holding Evelyn's ID. That name on her license isn't going to tell you anything. But I'd bet my pension that if you run Evelyn Reed through a joint service database, maybe flag it for SpecWar or JSOC, you're going to get a big red pop-up. First Sergeant Clark stared at the Master Chief, then over at Evelyn. He saw her now through a different lens. He saw the unnerving calm, the perfect economy of her posture. He saw the way she had neutralized 2 men twice her size without a scratch. A seed of doubt, cold and heavy, planted itself in his gut. He pulled out his phone. He walked to a corner of the gym and made a call. His back was to the room, but everyone watched him. They saw his shoulders tense. They saw him stand up straighter, as if coming to attention while on the phone. His conversation was short, filled with monosyllabic responses. Yes, sir, I understand, sir, it will be handled, sir. When he turned around, the color was gone from his face. His expression was a mixture of shock, awe, and something that looked a lot like fear. He walked directly to Evelyn. He stopped 5 feet in front of her and squared his shoulders. Ma'am, he said, and the word was imbued with a depth of respect that was utterly profound. It was not the sarcastic ma'am Davis had used. It was the ma'am an enlisted man uses to address a high-ranking officer or someone else who occupies a space in the military hierarchy he could barely comprehend. Evelyn met his gaze and simply nodded. First Sergeant Clark took a deep breath, then turned to his men. His face was now a mask of cold fury. Davis. Miller. Sanchez. On your feet, he roared. The sound was so loud it made people flinch. The 3 soldiers scrambled to their feet, wincing. They snapped to a shaky version of attention, their eyes wide with terror. They had never heard this tone from their first sergeant before. You 3 are a disgrace, Clark said, his voice now a low, menacing snarl. You are a stain on that uniform, on this army, and on the memory of every real soldier who ever served. He stalked over to them, his presence overwhelming. You thought you were tough. You thought you could bully a child and her mother at a school fair. You decided to represent the United States Army by being common thugs. He got right in Davis's face. Do you have any idea who you just assaulted? Davis, pale and still struggling for breath, could only shake his head. No, you don't, Clark hissed. And I'm not authorized to tell you. But I will tell you this, you are lucky to be breathing. You are lucky she decided to use restraint. You are lucky you are going to a stockade and not a morgue. He turned to the police officer. These men are now in my custody. They will be transported back to base and will face a full court-martial. We will handle all charges. The officer nodded. Understood, First Sergeant. Clark then turned back to Evelyn. His demeanor softened instantly. Ma'am, on behalf of the United States Army, I offer you my deepest and most sincere apologies. This will not be swept under the rug. I can assure you of that. The police officer stepped forward. Mr. Clark is right, ma'am. With this many witnesses, and their own admission of guilt, you can press charges. Assault is a serious offense. Evelyn looked at the three soldiers. They stood, heads bowed, stripped of all their earlier bravado. They were just scared kids who had made a terrible, life-altering mistake. They looked small. Pathetic. That won't be necessary, Evelyn said, her voice even. The consequences they will face from their command will be sufficient. She paused, her gaze resting on Davis for a moment. The lesson was the objective. I believe the lesson has been learned. It was not a statement of forgiveness. It was a mission debrief. Cool, clinical, and final. With that, the affair was concluded. First Sergeant Clark had his disgraced soldiers escorted out of the gymnasium, their careers in ruins. The police finished their report, classifying it as a military matter. The principal, relieved that his school would not be the center of a lawsuit, began trying to restore a sense of normalcy to the fair, a hopeless task. Evelyn took Maya's hand. The small crowd, which had remained in a state of suspended animation, parted for them as they walked toward the exit. The whispers followed them, a wake of awe and speculation. They stepped out of the gymnasium's heat and into the cool afternoon air. The chaotic noise of the fair faded behind them, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves in the trees that lined the parking lot. They walked in silence for a moment, their footsteps echoing softly on the pavement. Mom? Maya asked, her voice small. Yes, sweetie. That man. The one in the hat. He said. He said you were the real thing. She looked up at her mother, her eyes full of a new kind of wonder, mixed with the lingering shadow of fear. He was right, wasn't he? You really were a SEAL. Evelyn stopped and knelt down again, looking her daughter directly in the eye. I was part of a team like that, yes, she said softly. A long time ago. So you can beat up anyone? Maya asked, the simple logic of a child trying to make sense of the world. Evelyn managed a small, rare smile. Being strong isn't about being able to beat people up. That's the easy part. She gently brushed a stray strand of hair from Maya's forehead. The hard part, the most important part, is control. It's knowing all the things you can do, and choosing not to. It's about using just enough strength to solve the problem, and no more. Strength without control is just damage. Do you understand? Maya thought about it for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I think so. You didn't hurt them. Not really. You just stopped them. Exactly, Evelyn said, standing up and taking her hand again. You only ever use what is necessary. That's the real strength. As they reached their sensible, unassuming sedan at the far end of the lot, Evelyn paused. She glanced back toward the gymnasium entrance. Standing there, silhouetted against the bright doorway, was the old sailor. The retired Command Master Chief. He was too far away for her to see his expression clearly, but she didn't need to. He did not wave. He did not salute, that would have been a breach of 1,000 unwritten rules. Instead, he simply raised his hand and gave her a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of profound, shared understanding. A silent acknowledgement from one quiet professional to another, across the gulf of years and experience. It was a sign of ultimate respect, earned not in a blaze of glory, but in a moment of perfect, deadly control. Evelyn met his gaze across the distance. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod in return. Then she unlocked the car, helped her daughter into her seat, and drove away, leaving the chaos and the whispers behind her, just another mom driving her child home after a day at school.